Max. Greetings.
Max?
Yes. I have an announcement for everybody. I've learned that the real world is far more interesting than television could ever be. So, I'm through with it.
That's good, Axe.
I'm proud of you, Axe.
Thank you.
Good job.
There you are.
I have missed you very much, my small friend.
And goodbye.
Later.
Television, new religion, man everyone's seen. Hallelujah, politicians don't wanna listen, they only wanna make money out of you. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Ah, the Animorphs TV show, Annie TV. Airing for 1.5 seasons from September 1998 to March 2000 on Nickelodeon in the States and YTV in Canada. One of the ideas behind the Opinionated Animorphs series was to relive and explore the Animorphs experience we original readers had back in the 90s, and as such, I knew we'd have to discuss the show eventually. To say that it was a letdown to most hardcore fans of the book series would be an understatement, and many people still have a really serious grudge, even if they haven't watched any of the episodes since their original airing. Still, it may be time we sweep those high expectations aside and re-examine the series from the beginning. I split this introduction into 2 parts, not for length but for subject matter. This first part will discuss my personal history with the show and my views of the production, as well as explain a few things about the Opinionated Animorphs episode guide and how it'll differ from the book guide. The second part will be something of a mini-documentary on the history of the show and its place on the Nickelodeon canon, and will include excerpts from an audio interview I got with Emmy-nominated director and screenwriter Ron Oliver, who wrote and directed several episodes of the series. I'll post the interview in full at a later date. So, let's set the Wayback Machine back to early 1998, when news got out that not only was my favorite book series being adapted for television, but it was going to be on my favorite channel at the time, Nickelodeon. One problem, though. At that time, my family couldn't afford cable, and us living in the mountains meant we couldn't even get basic broadcast. We did have a TV, though, and we had a VCR. So what I did was arrange for my grandparents in California, who did have cable, to set their VCR on a timer and record each episode. Once they had 3 episodes on a tape, they would mail it our way. This was how far I was willing to go to get my Animorphs TV. I thought this would be the landmark show of the decade. I really did. Well, after I got 4 tapes, I told my grandparents to forget about it, that it wasn't worth the effort. I was, a bit unfortunately, part of that original group of fans who had set their expectations much too high for this series. I didn't hold on to the tapes too long, giving them to a classmate who also didn't have cable. And that's too bad, because the show is yet to be released on DVD, and while all the episodes are available in tape trading circles, some of the picture quality is pretty poor. Let me take this moment to disclaimer that I've tried my damnedest to clean these videos up, but a lot of them are 4th to 6th generation copies, so forgive me, the episode guide shan't be in HD. Well, over 12 years have passed since the show began, and I've changed a lot since then. Graduated, moved away from home, held steady jobs, studied film and literature, became an anarchist, got laid, got drunk, did stuff. So my views on what makes good and bad television have naturally changed as well. First off, let's talk about adaptation. It can be a tricky word, and different people put different values to it. And when talking about Annie TV, it's the thing people tend to bring up the most. They changed this from the books. They changed that. Well, here's my stance on the word. One that's changed quite a bit since the days of patiently waiting for the next batch of episodes in the mail. I believe that how accurately and how faithfully a piece of work adapts from another is ultimately unimportant. And what really matters is the quality of the finished work. An adaptation can be so in name only, but if the final product is still good, then it's still good. There are many reasons to change something from one medium to another. Sometimes it has to do with runtime, that there are simply not enough minutes allowed to a movie or episode of a television program to explore all the details of the source material. Sometimes it's in the difference of the mediums themselves. A book with a lot of internal character narration needs to be completely reworked if it's going into a visual medium that doesn't easily allow for that. Sometimes it's budget, with a minor character getting cut so that they don't have to pay for an additional actor, or they change something so the special effects would be easier to produce. And sometimes the director or writer wants to inject their own thoughts and ideas into the original, change something because they think it would be better and or more interesting. For example, in the 2009 film adaptation of Watchmen, the squid alien subplot was removed and placed with Dr. Manhattan taking the blame of the attacks. Now, I may piss off some nerds with this, but I feel that was a huge improvement over the original graphic novel, partially because it cut off some of the fat of the original and made the story tighter, but mostly because it made Dr. Manhattan an active participant in stopping nuclear war, as opposed to just an unattached observer, which in turn finishes his story arc. Sometimes changes to the source material have to do with the time that the adaptation was made. David Cronenberg's The Fly and John Carpenter's The Thing were both very different from their original films because people's Cold War fears of nuclear mad science and Soviet invasion had given way to a fear of body horrors brought on by things like the rise of the AIDS virus. If the context had not been updated, neither of those films would have been nearly as effective. My point is, there are many technical and artistic reasons to change things, and to get caught up in what they changed, as opposed to why they changed and how those changes contributed to the product as a whole, is really a waste of time. Taking a recent example, I'm not mad at The Last Airbender film because of the things it changed from the television series. I'm mad at it because it's an all-around shitty film. I don't care if Katara doesn't have her hair loopies, or if most firebenders can't produce fire. I care about being fed insipid narration, horrible action choreography, and stunted acting. Now, there are instances where a change is made, and the source material's version is clearly superior, and there's no good technical or artistic reasons to change it. Staying with the Last Airbender example, one of my biggest peeves was changing Aang's final move against the Fire Nation ships from him turning into a giant water monster to simply summoning a giant wave. Technically, there is no reason they couldn't have produced a giant water monster. And artistically, it makes no sense that an army invading a city knowingly full of people who can control water wouldn't be prepared for a goddamn wave. Giant water monster? That's scary. Giant wave? Fuck off. Ultimately, adaptation is hardly the most important thing for me. And while I'll certainly be discussing the differences between the books and the TV series, it's not going to be as big of a factor for me as it is for other people. And sometimes, at the risk of all of you tying me to a stake and lighting me ablaze, some of the changes from the books will actually be improvements. Now, I know this all sounds like I'm setting up to reveal that I've decided that the series has been truly misjudged and it's really good and you're all fools for not believing in it or whatever. That's not the case at all. Having just rewatched the entire series, I can say that it's largely mediocre. A bit too silly, often dreadful, with occasions of rising to the challenge and becoming decent television. I simply don't pin that level of quality on its faithfulness. On the matter of how I feel about this series, let's take a moment to talk about my scoring system. Namely, I don't really have one. I don't put a lot of thought into the numbers besides, if I loved it, give it a high score. If I thought it was so-so, give it a middling score. If I disliked it, give it a low score. If it's Megamorphs 2, 0, bitch. I use it to give a semi-official stamp to indicate my personal feelings to a book or an episode. I don't work these things out in a spreadsheet and have any kind of math behind it. Now, my inspiration and future adoptive father, SF Debris, uses a similar out of 10 scoring system, but his system is ranking episodes of a series from best to worst, with a 10 being the best of a series and a 0 being the worst. Despite stamping his name in my opening credits all the time, this is one aspect of his reviews I have not taken, as I find the system to be utterly meaningless. Okay, all the review scores, star, sis ratings, thumbs up and thumbs downs are all meaningless, really. but SF's debris system even more so. It assigns value only within the context of itself. In his system, an episode of Star Trek Enterprise may get a 10, but a 10 for Enterprise may be a 6 for Star Trek The Next Generation. A score of 3 for Deep Space Nine may be a 7 for Voyager. Saying something is the best or worst of a series really doesn't indicate if an episode is worth watching, as the worst of a good series may still be a good episode, but the best of a shitty series is still a waste of time. So yeah, I'm not going to be doing that. Simply put, while there are episodes of Annie TV that are better than others, I will not be assigning a score of 10 to any of them, because my system is simply by the gut, and my gut says none of these episodes deserve such a score. Also, why do I keep trying to kill it with Taco Bell? But really, you can ignore the number scores if you want. I consider them the least important part of any of my reviews. If you're curious about watching the series, as of this video, all the episodes are pretty easy to find on YouTube. There were 4 official VHS collections released, but that only covers a little less than half the episodes. Well, that about does it for the context of my reviews, but as for the context of the series itself, well, you'll have to slip over to part 2.